Chapter 21. The Story of Brice Taylor, born Susan Ford. According to a DK, Brice Taylor is one of the highest-level MKUltra mind-controlled victims to have come forward to reveal her story. It took her 13 years to recover her memories of events that she revealed in her 1999 book entitled Thanks for the Memories. Her memories began to return in sporadic fragments in 1985, following a car accident that threw her through the windscreen of her car after hitting a tree. She began to recover memories about her role as a top-level NASDAQ mind-controlled asset who was used as a sex slave and message, drug, carrier for every president from Kennedy to Clinton, and was Henry Kissinger's personal secretary, human computer, file storage and retrieval, for over 19 years. Her owner handler was comedian Bob Hope, and she was loaned out to many famous and well-known entertainment personalities in order to oblige them to be beholden to and manipulated by Hope and his Illuminati pals, so they could be used as worker bees to help usher in the Luciferian New World Order. Her book is a revealing account involving well-known personalities in politics and the entertainment industry who are involved in the handling, programming, control, manipulation and abuse of Illuminati government-created human robots like Brice and other victims like Barbara Streisand and Barbara Mandrell. Taylor writes in her book that what most of you have not been allowed to know is that years ago, at the outset of the Cold War, permission was given to a hidden group of so-called professionals and leaders to experiment on the unsuspecting American populace in an effort to further a variety of advanced technology. The technology gleaned by the American leaders, medical professors and scientists was and still is in the form of bioelectromagnetic frequency medicine, genetic engineering, mind control, brain research, near-death experimentation, paranormal psychic experimentation, remote viewing, time and space travel and other advanced research that make our everyday human understanding look antiquated. She has suffered from man-made artificially induced multiple personality disorder, also called dissociative identity disorder. This trauma-based conditioning can produce many discrete personalities inside a single person, as we saw with Candy Jones also. These personalities can then be programmed like a computer to perform tasks such as sex slave prostitutes, careers and mind files, who are accessible only to a person who knows the code to access the program. Her memoirs are a composite of years of memory work describing the details and information as she worked to untangle the knots. Having been programmed to have a perfect photographic memory greatly aided me towards this enhancement, often meticulously detailed account. The training my controllers gave me backfired on them. Once my secret life began leaking into my conscious mind, I experienced so many intuitive flashbacks not only in my mind but in my body, that it forced me to recall these experiences in extensive detail to the point that it disrupted my everyday functioning, so much so that I was forced to leave my master's degree program and enroll in therapy. As a girl, she was subjected to ongoing trauma, including continual rape by her father, who also used her for child prostitution and child pornography. Her book is the story of the creation of a human robot. She writes that for years my father performed a variety of brutal ritual-type physical and psychological abuses, among them confinement in closets, cages and coffins, while I was being told that I was left there to die, near drowning, isolation, needles inserted into sensitive areas of the body, food and sleep deprivation, electroshock via wires, welding equipment and cattle prods, drugging, sophisticated hypnotic and electronics programming. She was forced to participate in torturous rituals and orgies and was then sold in a slave auction. Elitists in the market for mind control slaves attend auctions that appear at first like children fashion shows and then progress to striptease acts. I made appearances at many shows before I was actually sponsored or sold, she says. She also says that her owner was Bob Hope and her other sponsor, who she called Uncle Charlie, was Charles L. Horn, owner of the Federal Cartridge Company, which later funded the Olin Foundation where he was president. Charlie introduced her to Henry Kissinger, who continued her mind control programming in preparation for her later use as his mind file, to act as a personal computer with classified and other government files accessible only to Kissinger. She also endured more programming based on The Wizard of Oz, Disneyland and The Parent Trap twin sister themes, as well as NASA mind control techniques. Besides being prostituted to the power elite, she was taught to perform for them as well. She recited a mind control comedy routine written for her by Bob Hope. Her personality, called Sharon, gave this repertoire. I told my owners, it's enough that you clowns expect me to work for free. You know that it was bad enough that they broke the child labor laws, and I told them that when I learned about it in school, they just laughed. But on top of that was slave labor, and I recited the constitutional amendment that was causing a problem in my internal mind file legal system. I told Henry it kept getting thrown out, and I pretended that it was repeatedly escaping and leaping out of my right ear. He thought I was funny and told me to refile it anyway. Then I was sent off for more reconditioning. I never thought they would stop with that stuff, and I was right. Zap, zap, zap. These zaps refer to her electric shocks that she received to remind her and to recondition her program. As a mind-controlled sex slave, she was prostituted to JFK, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan, and was called a $1 million baby. She wrote that I overheard conversations where the President of the US and other top politicians were offered the services of escorts. The CIA's latest human robot technology programmed sex and espionage slaves. They were encouraged to use these escorts to satisfy their sexual and emotional needs, instead of exposing themselves to outside individuals. As I later learned, Project Monarch Beta trained sex slaves were called $1 million babies, referring to the large amount of money each slave would bring in from a very early age. In the 1960s, the use of Project Monarch presidential model sex slaves cost around $1,200 for an evening. Henry called me his $1 million machine. Henry Kissinger used her as his personal computer at meetings of the Energy Commission, NATO, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission and House Appropriations on Foreign Trade. She also writes in detail about an Illuminati-like council which directs policies and stages global events from behind the scenes. Henry was the top dog as far as the council was concerned. He had the mind they needed that could so carefully strategize plans so far in advance, and so he usually got the desired results. In the council's eyes, Rockefeller was more dispensable because he had the money and power but didn't have the mastermind that they saw in Henry, she says. Behind the scenes, Henry controlled decisions and actions taken by the State Department in matters of foreign relations, always attempting to bring about a situation where the council was in total control globally. They saw it as a game, a lifelong plan, with the outcome hopefully being that finally this generation of the global elite would succeed in the game that their forefathers had not been able to pull off. It created ambition and drive among them, she says. Brice Taylor writes in her book that while Reagan was president, the vice president was a pedophile. She then describes the traumatization of her daughter Kelly at the hands of George Bush. Over the years, Kelly was closely tied into the trauma that I received. Repeatedly she was tortured and traumatized in front of me in an effort to keep me in line. Her torture fragmented her psyche in order to create multiple personalities within her, so she could follow in my footsteps for later use as a presidential model. Unfortunately, she didn't have to wait very long for that so-called privilege, as our newly elected vice president at the time, George Bush, was a pedophile, and Kelly was created to be, as I later found out from a renegade CIA operative, what was called a Bush baby. Corroboration of this type of crime against children can also be found in Cathy O'Brien's book entitled Transformation of America. O'Brien also has a daughter named Kelly, and government sources indicate that little girl Bush babies are named Kelly so that the pedophile doesn't have to remember the victim's name. Both Brice Taylor and Cathy O'Brien relate similar stories of being hunted by George Bush on Bob Hope's Jordan Ranch called The Most Dangerous Game. Taylor also claims that Frank Sinatra told her that it was he who ordered Elvis Presley to be murdered. She was told to call Sinatra Uncle Frankie, and that she had no choice but to sexually serve him and play into his S&M fetish, where he would orgasm upon choking her to near death. In David Icke's book entitled The Perception Deception, he highlights the story of a female named Arizona Wilder who had the birth name of Jennifer Green. She described how she was specifically bred from psychic bloodlines by the U.S. government mind control program to conduct sacrifice and other rituals for satanic archon hybrids in the U.S., UK and in Europe. She said that she was mind-programmed using trauma and torture in a technique called trauma-based mind control. The mind copes with this by splitting into compartments, or what are known as alters in the industry. The victims can be switched between compartments or alters, so what one compartment experiences, none of the other compartments remember. Arizona was one of Joseph Mengel's assets and says that he was her main abuser. She described many famous names that she saw shape-shift into a reptilian form at bloodline rituals. These included Mengel, the Queen, Queen Mother, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Princess Margaret, Father George Bush and his sons, J. Rockefeller, Presidents Gerald Ford and Lyndon Johnson, Madeleine Albright and Tony Blair, and many of the Rothschilds.